It took 12 ballots, but now there is a break in the Republican resistance to Kevin McCarthy. McCarthy promised progress. We are finally seeing it. 14 rebel holdouts moving from never to eventually Kevin. For the first time, McCarthy netting more votes than Hakeem Jeffries. We should note McCarthy is still on track to fall short of the magic number needed to clinch the speakership. We shall see. It's likely they'll move quickly to another vote. Let's go to Manu Raju on Capitol Hill. Manu, what are you seeing and hearing?
Yeah, well, there's going to be a real effort to try to win over those remaining holdouts. Patrick McHenry, who's one of the top deputies of Kevin McCarthy, told me just moments ago that they see clear momentum moving in their direction. Now they're going to focus on those remaining holdouts, and they may have some support from some of those who flipped. One of those who flipped, Scott Perry. He's the leader of the hard-right Freedom Caucus, someone who had been opposing Kevin McCarthy all along, but engaged in negotiations over the last day or so to give them more say over the legislative process. Ultimately, he said the deal was inked after he saw the details on paper. He said he was comfortable with it and decided to move forward. And he just told a group of us just now that they plan to lobby and discuss and try to convince some of the members who may be hesitant to support this right now. And also one very important thing he said that was part of the deal is dealing with raising the national debt limit. He just told a group of us that they address this issue. This is going to be a major flashpoint in the new Congress. They have to avoid a debt default, and that's going to happen sometime this year, maybe in the middle part of this year. He said there's some agreement on how to deal with that. One thing he said is they would not agree to a clean debt ceiling increase, meaning they need some conditions tied to avoid a national debt default, which has never happened in American history. So that is going to be a huge fight going forward. But from what Scott Perry just told a group of us, that was part of this deal that has not yet been publicly released, but that apparently was reached between a handful of these holdouts and Kevin McCarthy. So this deal not just process, giving them more leverage over the speaker, that being able to oust a sitting speaker with one individual doing that, having more members of those hard-right Freedom Caucus on some of the key committees, but policy implications as well in dealing with the national debt ceiling. Big significant issue going forward. But for McCarthy right now on the floor, they're counting the votes. Right now, the clerks are making sure that the tally is correct. He's likely going to fall short here, but they feel clear momentum. They think they can get there, maybe not today, but very close. Maybe in the next coming days, they believe that McCarthy will soon become Speaker of the House.
Manu, do you expect them to push for another vote immediately?
That was the expectation. When I asked Patrick McHenry about that, do you expect another vote after this one? He said, I do. So that was the expectation going in. Now, of course, they need to have all 218 members of 218 votes to adjourn the House. It's unclear if they would have that, if they wanted to take a break and negotiate further offline. But if they don't have 218 votes to adjourn, they're required to go to another speaker vote. So we could see that right after this. It's unclear if the votes will change, but at the moment, these negotiations probably are going to happen as these votes wrap up behind the scene in the cloakroom and in an office just off the House floor where McCarthy has been occupying as they try to nail down these final votes and finally claim the speakership. Anderson.
All right, Manu Raju, appreciate it. Thanks. We'll check back in with you. So back here in New York, Scott Perry, obviously a big, as a leader of the Freedom Caucus, I mean, that's a big switch.
Yeah, so I think the Scott Perry's big. I think Chip Roy, some of the other, Byron Donalds, right, Gosar, all these are big gets. Norman, and I think the difference is now, other than you're not going to have Kevin McCarthy and his lieutenants going around kind of twisting arms. You're going to have these 14 people who just switched, twisting the arms of the outliers, right? Those are the people who are now going to go and say, hey, we did this. We need you to come along. And they're going to make the argument. Scott Perry's going to make the argument, right? I think that's much more persuasive.
The question, I mean, they didn't come along because they had some sort of enlightenment. They came along because they cut deals. The question is, what additional deals do they have to cut with the remaining? And are they subject to cutting deals, or are they just more? But this thing that Manu talked about, the debt ceiling. This has been something that a lot of people have worried about. I was around in 2011 when there was there was a similar effort to try and tie the debt ceiling to all kinds of concessions, and it took us to the precipice of what would have been a catastrophe. And so this is why I understand the sort of sport of all of this, but the aftermath is going to be very, very important.
One of the things that these 7 holdouts have claimed they want is deep investigations of the Biden administration. They are the most interested in getting the investigatory process rolling. What I expect to happen on the floor next is for the clerk to read the tally, then roll into another vote. And I think the next nominating speech for McCarthy is going to be given by Congressman Jamie Comer of Kentucky's 1st District. He's going to be one of the most famous members of the conference because he is going to be the chairman of the House Oversight Committee. He will be the tip of the spear on all these investigations. And I don't know what he's going to say, but here's what's true. As long as this is going on, that committee doesn't exist, and the oversight doesn't exist, and the subpoenas don't exist. But because Comer is getting up to make a speech here, I just think it bears pointing out. If you're a conservative who voted for a Republican for the House, there's probably a 100% chance that you want Biden to be investigated. And the Matt Gaetz 7, they are the ones who are stopping you right now. And I hope Jamie Comer makes that point in his speech nominating
Well, I'll tell you
McCarthy.
who's been making the point. Someone who's likely to be a new member, if reports are correct, of the Oversight Committee, Marjorie Taylor Greene,
Yeah.
Yes.
who is on no committees right now because of her behavior. And she wrote today, Dems are openly plotting to elect a moderate Democrat-approved speaker if we don't elect McCarthy. That is what I've been warning about. If this happens, you can kiss investigations into COVID, the Biden crime family, DOJ weaponization, impeachment, and subpoena power goodbye. So welcome to the new era. Huh?
Did you retweet
You
that?
retweeted that?
But in terms of grinding these people down,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just telling you, all these grassroots donors, all these people who knock on doors,
That's my point.
the fact that they should now know right now, the only thing standing between investigating Biden and subpoenaing Mayorkas and looking into the border and whatever you're mad
You're right,
about
you're
is
right.
Matt
Do you
Gaetz.
do you think last November?
224-3121.
Do you think this? We all saw what happened in November. We all saw what happened. Do you think this is what the broader electorate is hungering for? That boy, I can't wait to get the investigations going on.
Oh no, that's what he said.
No,
but the-
No, I understand. I'm
Republicans are
making a
hungry
different
for it.
point, which is there's this narrow thing as to whether Kevin McCarthy can piece the votes together to be speaker. And then there's this larger thing about, well, what does that mean for the rest of the 2 years of his tenure? I suspect it'll only be 2 years if it is 2 years. And this is what we can look forward to.
And Dave, your point earlier about the debt ceiling. Look, the debt ceiling negotiations are never easy, right? You pointed to 2011. There's always a tension between, do we continue to spend crazily, right? With money we don't have. We raise taxes. How do we do this? A lot of people think, there are budget deficits that are running out of control. They take those things seriously, and so that's a concern always, not just in this Congress. So I don't know.
I think we have to ask-
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think we do have to ask ourselves, though, after what we've seen for the last 3 days. I mean, the debt ceiling, again, it would be a catastrophe. You have 7 people. We had 20, maybe 10, now 7, who are willing to take us to the brink for
but-
3 days. There is a very real question that David is putting on the table in terms of what is actually in this deal. And we know that there are at least 7 people who are perfectly willing to
Ken,
take us to, David, let me finish, who are perfectly willing to let us go to the very brink of destruction. Again, as you said, only for their own gain.
Well, I would just say a lot of people think that we are on the brink of destruction and catastrophe with the debt limit spending that we're doing right now, just runaway spending and just continue to raise the debt
They
ceiling
didn't think
over and
about
over.
it. They didn't think that during the 4 years of the Trump administration.
I'm saying,
he added more to the debt than anybody.
David, I'm not going to argue with that. I'm just saying that there's a contingent here, right, and in America that find that equally as repugnant as raising the debt ceiling. They'd rather take us to the
How
president.
likely is it in the next round, assuming that they continue to vote, is there enough time to move some of these 7 who remain?
There might be. There might be. Look, there's 7, and it looks like he's going to need to flip at least 3. If he can flip 3 of the 7, then he can get it today. Looking at who those people are, Lauren Boebert doesn't seem flippable. Matt Gaetz, not flippable. Bob Good doesn't seem flippable. Andy Biggs, Rosendahl, I'm not so sure. Harrison Crane, maybe. So this is going to be a real test of Kevin McCarthy's and frankly, his ability to enroll his allies in an effort to change some of these holdouts.
Scott?